And welcome back to Meeting of the Minds. Today I'm here with our special guest, the great Kennedy Hall, author of Terror of Demons. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, it's such a great time with you and Tim. We were on his show, Meaning of Catholic, and wanted to bring you in for our viewers, talk about St. Joseph, Catholic masculinity, all the above.
Right. Very cool.
So let's start off talking about your book. Great. Again, a lot of times you see a book comes out that you wish you wrote. And that's what that's what I thought when I saw your book.
Right. Yeah. It was fun to write it. Partly I wrote it for, I guess, my own spiritual exercise. You've obviously, Sensus Fidelium, the channel on YouTube. You've probably listened to it 1,000 times, as many of us has. And there's a talk on there by Father Chad Ripperger, who is famous exorcist priest, traditional priest, and it's called How to Raise a Man. And it's an amazing talk. It really is an amazing talk. And like a lot of things that Father Ripperger says, there are so much packed into a single phrase that you almost have to listen to it again and again. Because he's good at teaching, but he's also extremely highly intelligent. So you have to basically break down what he said. So I listened to the talk a few times, and I realized in there that there were a lot of topics that needed to be teased out, I guess is the right way to look at it. And then I was also, I was looking around for books that I thought, because I coach a lot of rugby, young men. I'm a teacher, so I interact with young people a lot. And today, besides all the controversial stuff, but just in general, it's like, what does it mean to be a man? It's actually not an easy question to answer. And there's a lot of philosophical stuff. There's psychological stuff. But we are created by God as men and women. So we know it when we see it, Like, you don't have to have a PhD in psychology to understand what it means to be a man. You just are one, So I thought there's the academic side, but then there's got to be the practical side. So I wanted to write a book that was readable, and I actually used a software because I'm kind of a nerd. So when I was writing it to start, it was like, it was written like something I would hand in university, And then when I was doing the software editing, I realized it was written at like a grade 12 reading level or a university reading level. So I brought it down by changing my sentences so everybody could read it. But I wanted a resource that I could give people to just say, hey, just do this, learn this, and you'll get the basics down for what it means to be a Catholic man. So that's kind of where I started.
Yeah, because it seems like there's a lot of misunderstandings. And like yourself, when I listened to Father Chad Ripperger, it was like a big whirlwind of all this new information that my dad never taught me. God bless him. He always meant well, still means well. He wasn't taught that. Our society, it's completely the opposite. You watch on TV, any of the shows, well, hopefully we're not watching the stuff on TV, but the man is always meant to look incompetent, and the wife is the one who calls the shots.
Yeah. It's the Homer Simpson syndrome.
That's right.
And it's funny, like, obviously, in your marriages, even if they're rightly ordered, like you have fun with each other. And I'm sure the wife might say, oh, my husband, what a dunce or something. And like, you can have fun with that.
Of course.
But, and the stereotypes would go both ways, I guess. But as far as looking at men as being respectable, etc., it's not really common, Even the APA, this American, I guess, Psychiatric Association, they labeled traditional masculinity, and I didn't know this before I wrote my book. Somebody sent me a message. Labeled it as harmful, like it was something that was bad. The ideas of traditional masculinity, and you know what? Give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they mean 1950s. Maybe they think tradition means the show Mad Men or something, where a guy wears a nice suit but cheats on his wife. That's bad. Just because infidelity is bad, right? But that's not bad because he's a man. That's bad because he's sinful, right? And it could go with both men and women. So even in the psychological realm, it's very hard to find somebody who looks at men and women with a Christian anthropology. Like, what is a man for? Because that's a big difference. We see that with the sciences today, even in things like chemistry, biology. You could go in there with a bias and you say, I want to find out X, Y, and Z. Well, you're going to look for X, Y, and Z. And that's fine. Nothing is really that objective. We are the subject acting on the object, grammatically speaking. So it's not easy to be objective. I get that. So that makes a big difference, though. If we go into looking at men and women with, well, I think men should be like this because that would be the optimal man. Well, if you're wrong about what you think they should be like, then you're going to be wrong with your findings, essentially, and how you infer from them. So I also wanted to give men the benefit of the doubt that, God made you for a certain purpose. It's a good purpose. And there's a right way to be and there's a wrong way to be. And we explore that in the book.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, they don't realize, of course, we love femininity. Femininity is a great thing. It's feminism once we cross that line. Once we cross that line, and you see it everywhere. I just passed a billboard driving in New York City, taking my wife to the doctor, get the checkup on the baby. And we see it says a big poster it says women are the best, and like flexing the muscles and everything. It's like, now imagine if that was flipped to men. Not that we'd want that, but do you see how it just creeps in?
Oh, and it's just silly. Like, I mean, I've got 4 children who are, my oldest is 4.5, and it's 4, 3, 2, and 10 months old. So it's a fun household. But like, even if my son said men are like boys are the best, I would be like, that's funny because you're 4 years old, But if he did that when he was 18 and was flexing and took a picture of himself, I'd be like, bro, you're kind of being a loser. like what are you doing? That's just vanity. I mean, you're just saying, look at me, I'm so great. And I always try to give the feminists the benefit of the doubt because, in our world, people conflate the word feminism with meaning that you just want women to be treated well. And that's not really the case. If you read into the first, second, and third wave, I mean, the first wave feminism, people say, yeah, it's just about voting. It's not really. There's always been a great skepticism about, once again, the anthropology, like what's good for men, what's good for women, what are they for, and that's always been there in all of these post-Enlightenment philosophies, and that very harmful. Years later, you see the fruits develop. But if what a woman means is, feminism is women are treated well, I want women to be treated well. In fact, I want women to be treated well so strongly that I wrote a book telling men how to act better so they could treat their wives and daughters and mothers better. So I hope people don't get too caught up, because I've had some reviews and stuff, and they say this seems anti-feminist. I'm like, the book's not even about that. It's about men acting well, behaving, being virtuous. And if you want a better world for women, then you want half the human race to act better. That just seems pretty practical to me.
Yeah. You just go back to Aristotle, the formal and the final cause, right? Championed by Aquinas, that if we don't know what man is and what man is created for, and does the world revolve around me or does everything revolve around the Lord, we're going to be completely off in our conclusions. So that's why you have to talk about, I always feel like we're puttering around with the issues about the economy and politics, and I get it, rightfully so. But if we don't start with doctrine and what are the church teachings and who is man and what is it all about, you're never going to get to the heart of any issue. It's just Republican, Democrat, this policy versus that policy. The beginning is so important.
And we see that in our church too, like the controversy over, let's say, migration. My mom's an Italian immigrant, Zanetti. I know you've come from the same motherland, and it's wonderful, paisan. But so I have no problem with migration. I mean, migration it's as old as the Bible. The Jews wandered around the Middle East and whatever. But we don't know what a person is for. So by extension, we don't know what a nation is for, because nation just means born. That's what the word means. It comes from nascere, it means to be born. So when people say I'm patriotic, but I'm not nationalistic, they actually kind of mean the same thing. Patriotic means from your father. Nation means from your birth. Well, they're pretty closely related. But so we see that in the church, where the so-called conservative side will be like, oh, we need to stop migration. And the so-called liberal side will say things like, we need more and more because it's solidarity and social justice. It's like, you know what? All of that is irrelevant if we don't know what a person is for. If we think that it's a good thing for people to come to whatever country you live in, but we don't know what they should be there for, then there's no reason why it'll be any better when they're here than where they were. And then also we have to remember, I'm getting off topic here a bit, but you got to remember the principle of subsidiarity, right? I mean, I've been to Mexico twice, Mexico City. I've never been there on vacation. I've been there on missions twice. So not the beach, but the actual heart of the city, doing missionary work in the garbage dumps, very poorest of the poor. It changed my life. It was wonderful. Mexico City is actually a pretty impressive city. But nonetheless, it doesn't do the average Mexican any benefit to label their country as a place that everyone should leave. Because it's a wonderful country, and they have wonderful people and a wonderful culture. And it's better for any country, that Mexico is just an example, to do everything to build that place up so they can have their sovereign culture, their sovereign ethnicity, their sovereign nation, like the church has espoused. Anyway, so it's not an either or. It's what is the person for? Yeah.
And I think it also becomes difficult. I'd love to get your expertise in this and your opinion so I just basically came back to the church. I was always a Catholic, but my reversion about 5 years ago. So even when I started dating my wife 3 years ago, I didn't know anything about the authority structure, never heard of Father Chad Ripperger. There wasn't the meaning of Catholic. I didn't see Kennedy Hall's book, Terror of Demons, back then. So this was all relatively new information to me and my wife, who also comes from a pretty Catholic family, not a traditional Catholic, which is kind of a funny term anyway. But in any event, now I started learning about the authority structure. Right. And the husband has authority over his wife, the twofold authority, spiritual and the physical. And the woman has that physical authority over her husband's body through the contract of marriage. Explaining that to people who've been trained in feminism and a liberal. I mean, I know how I explain this with my wife, but what would you recommend people who've gotten into marriages and relationships and now they have to backtrack?
No, you're exactly right. And let's break the church down right now into three categories. You've got the liberal, modernist, whatever, who do everything they can to explain most of the Bible away. Yeah. You've got the conservative, who believe the faith and they will profess the creed and everything. However, let's just say some of the hard teachings that aren't dogma but are traditional, so we need to retain them nonetheless. They might take a backseat to what seem like sort of post-Vatican II cultural advancements. I don't know if that makes sense.
Like the Christ the King, no salvation outside the church,
those kinds of
authority structure, all of that.
They won't deny them,
right.
But there is that spirit of interaction with the world, which rightly understood, obviously that's evangelization, but wrongly understood, it's kind of a differentism, and that creeps its way in. But then on the other hand, you have the traditionalist, which rightly understood just means Catholic, like everyone else for 1900 years, AKA Catholic. There's actually a website called AKA Catholic. But in there, a lot of time what you have is folks like yourself and me who grew up nominally. I mean, I was very nominal, like very little mass attendance growing up.
Sports were Sundays.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't play football on Sunday, but it was Friday nights and Saturdays, and usually we just didn't go to mass. Maybe some hockey on Sundays, but no mass. So I've noticed, because I kind of came from like secular and then kind of liberal Catholic, because I was very secular. I was studying a lot of this post-Enlightenment stuff in university, which is very liberal. And then I went into, it sort of became a conservative Catholic, and then from there. So I've seen sort of the whole gamut, right? But I see sometimes folks that really catch on fire with traditional Catholicism. They'll embrace the teachings, which is wonderful, but then they won't know what it means to have proper authority in their home. So there is it can become an arbitrary, almost tyranny, or it's more of a command rather than leadership. So how do we do this? Well, I think depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to, let's say, a conservative Catholic, they'll understand that there's a need for headship of the husband, but they won't have a framework for it because they see headship as something like dictator or something. So I like to use words like leadership. So using a sports analogy, I always pick a team captain, maybe a co-captain, but I pick a team captain at least every year for all the teams I coach. And I pick one. And that player doesn't actually have to be the best athlete, but they do have to have the greatest. Let's say if there was a set of virtues for sport, they have to be like the most virtuous athlete. They have to be the hardest working. They have to have control of their temper because they have to speak to the referee. They have to have an expertise enough in the game to lead, to make the right calls. They don't have to be the fastest. They don't have to be the best goal scorer or whatever. But they do have to be well-rounded and worth following. And actually, I notice when I've been coaching for a few years, so I've made some mistakes on who I've picked. When I pick the right captain, that person's leadership facilitates so much more freedom for everybody else to be who they're called to be as an athlete. So in a marriage, if you're talking to conservative Catholics, they'll understand the mutual submission part. We are each other's. I am yours, you are mine. That's our method of sanctification. I am yours at marriage, you are mine. We know that we are each other's stairway to heaven. It can be a crooked stairway at times, depending on, but you're each other's stairway to heaven. That's the mutual submission. But then we have the headship and the economy, where you say the household economy, right? From there, it's impossible to have 50-50. Like, let's actually follow that through. Our marriage is 50-50. So my wife never changes more than 7 diapers a day, and I never change more than 7 diapers a day, no matter what, because anything else is not 50-50. That's silly. That's silly. I'm home. Right now we're at home, but if I'm at work, there's 12 diapers to change while I'm at work. Does she just not change them and it's 50-50? Or when I get home, does she keep a tally and say, well, I changed 12 diapers, which means tomorrow you have to come home on your lunch and change 3? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So we know, practically speaking, that makes no sense. So instead what we do is we say, okay, what is the man for? What is the woman for? What is the husband for? What is the wife for? What makes more sense for our family? What makes the most sense for our children? What do our kids need right now? And what do we need from each other? We make decisions on that based on scripture. And then we put ourselves in those roles. And then you watch yourself grow from there. And in that sense, you have the sort of, I don't want to use the word equality because it means egalitarianism to most people, but if I may, then you have sort of the true equality, meaning all things being equal, I am free to be a man, you're free to be a woman, and we end up serving each other better as a result. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And just being able to have those kind of difficult conversations a lot of times as Catholics, as we learn this, and then we have to explain that to our wives. I know for me, I spoke a lot about the authority structure in terms of spiritual warfare, and how Father Ripperger said that the devil's tactics are very predictable. Goes after the man, tries to bring him down to base desires, namely lust. Then he will attack the woman to try to usurp the authority of the husband, and then they will go after the children to usurp the authority of the mother and the father. And that's real. That's nothing we control. I mean, it is the natural law and everything, but this is also the spiritual ramifications. So I was kind of going that route. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
That's the original sin. Like, honestly, I believe, and the church fathers ascribe 8 not capital, sorry, because there's only 7 capital sins, but 8 major sins to Adam and 5 major sins to Eve at the moment of the first sin, the original sin. Now, but one thing that goes unnoticed by a lot of people is they're actually both guilty of the sin of lust, because it's, I love this. I love the Bible for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is there is so much packed into one sentence. So we see, for example, it says, they saw the fruit was pleasing to the eyes. And it's like, oh yeah, you just think of, oh, it must have been ripe or something. No, what that means is they were attracted to something that caused them to have an elevation of a sensual pleasure just by gazing upon it. So what do we see Adam doing? Well, we don't see Adam doing anything, which is the point. Because he's gazing at what is pleasing to the eyes, which is lust, but is bad for him, which is lust. And since he is now distracted by his base desire of looking at things that are pleasing, that make him feel sensually aroused, then at that moment, he doesn't enact his proper authority of protection of the home. And then Eve dialogues with the devil, which usurps the role of the hierarchy there. And then from there, we see the fall in their children when Cain and Abel have a squabble and Cain ends up killing his brother. So you see exactly what you're talking about as the fruits of the original sin, which is man taken by lust, wife taking his role, which he should be doing in the first place, and then catastrophic misbehavior in the children. Yeah.
Right. right? And then now how that plays out in the day to day is maybe husband and wife maybe disagree on a certain topic on what needs to go, which direction the family is going to move in terms of maybe physical location, or what are the choices made for this or that certain important matters that aren't just like, maybe small day-to-day things raising children. And then now we have to, I think for me, the struggle is, okay, then at what point do you at certain points step in and say, well, you know, I'm the husband here. My responsibility is to lead you. I'll take the responsibility for whatever happens. Like, how do we do that practically?
Well, it depends on your, not you, but generally speaking, it depends on one's personal level of virtue. So if I had have written a book like this 6 years ago, I would have been a total hypocrite writing the book. And I wouldn't have written the book because I wouldn't have known what to write. But if I had have tried to act the same way, and I say this in, I think it's around chapter 7 of my book. I basically qualify like, hey, buddy, if you're not in line with your own virtue, you have no credibility in trying to get your family, your children, especially if you have grown children. I mean, if you got teenagers and you've been living a secular life and you go to mass, but there's no order in your home, that's going to be tough. So the only thing you can do at that point is you have to first work on your virtue. Now, I can't think of any biblical examples off the top of my head, but just naturally speaking, if a woman encounters a man, even if it's a man she already knows, but she notices a marked change in him where he is confident, he is compassionate. Like, being a man doesn't mean being macho and domineering, but like tender in the right way. I mean, so if a woman watches a man who is physically strong, morally strong, but can also, be a good father with her children, for example, help the little ones and things. There's a natural attraction to that. And she will be so open to his leadership because this is how we were created. Adam was created and Eve was created as his helpmate, right? Now, people, unfortunately, because our society, like I said, it's so egalitarian, they think, well, because she wasn't given, well, they were both given dominion. Actually, we should back up for that. But she's still given helpmate. So people think, well, Adam's first, so that must mean he's better. No, it's just an order. It doesn't mean that he's better. That doesn't mean at all. So since she's created his helpmate, that means that the responsibility is on Adam, and that it's important. It's his responsibility to delegate what is best for the home and what is best for his wife. So in order to be able to understand how to do that, you first have to turn yourself into, let's say, the new Adam. Because Adam fell, and then we have Jesus Christ as the model. So St. Paul says to us in Ephesians, and I believe in maybe 2 Corinthians, I might be wrong on that, he talks about the order of the family. Well, the husband is supposed to be to the point where he serves his wife by being crucified. So until you get to the point where you're like, I can literally carry a cross after being scourged, and my flesh is open and I'm bleeding all over the Via Dolorosa, then it's going to be hard for you to lead. Now, thankfully, Christ did the actual sacrifice, but in our lives, there's an analogy. So, for example, you want to have a big family? God bless you, right? Olive shoots around the table, as the Psalms say, right? That's a wonderful thing. But that means you're going to have to get up in the middle of the night, and your wife is not going to have to nag you about it because you should just be doing it. That means, my wife has to have C-sections. It's just a little example from our life. She has to have C-sections. She had 4 C-sections in like 3.5 years, 4 years. It's been very hard. Yeah, it's very hard on her. So I'm not trying to build myself up here, but just the last time she couldn't sleep in the bed. She had to sleep in a lazy boy because it just hurt too much. So we were in the living room. The couch was not comfortable, so I slept on the floor for 3 weeks because she needed me close to her. But that's not me being, oh, I'm so great. That's the least I can do. And she knows that about me. So now she's not like begrudging me saying you want to have more children. It's we get to have more children, and whatever needs to be done, I know you'll do it for me without asking. But that took a long time. So if husbands want to be leaders in their homes, they're going to have to become control of their own lives first.
Right. Like you said, that self-sacrifice, and that not just, yes, talking about it because that's important, but especially living it. And when the wife sees that in action, sees you're a man of prayer, that you're trying to live a life of virtue and honesty, you're not cutting corners when you can cut corners and other people won't see, she sees you're living that life of integrity, she's much more likely to submit. She wants to submit deep down.
Yep. And the word submission, what does it mean? Well, sub means under. Mission, well, means mission, right? So it's being under the mission of someone. So once again, it's a term that responds to leadership, right? A wife will gladly put herself under the leadership and protection of the husband who is willing to be crucified for her. Call me crazy, but that sounds like fairy tales to me in a good way. It's like, Sleeping Beauty or whatever story I'm thinking of. She's in a castle and there's a dragon, and Prince Charming will literally slay the dragon. I don't think that fairy tales need to be simply a myth. I don't think that fairy tales need to be fiction. I think that, and I know they were, because if you study the folklore of our Christian civilization, they're fictional tales, but they're meant to explain archetypal truths of how we're supposed to act. I have a little girl. She's my princess. Her name is Clover, and she's the most beautiful girl in the world, and I love her to pieces. And I expect that one day, if she chooses to get married, or the religious life, whatever, but if she chooses to get married, I expect one day that when her future suitor, her boyfriend or fiance, whatever, he must be worthy of a fairy tale. He must be worthy of being Prince Charming, because that's my little girl, And I expect that of him, because I don't think that these virtues we've heard about need to be a fiction, which means I know one day when my little girl grows up, gets married, that she'll be happy about the fact that she's going to marry a man who will gladly lead her to heaven. And you couldn't want anything more than that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And equal in dignity, but different roles, right? The man is the head, the woman is the heart. And it's important that it's like that. It's created like that for a reason. So that's important.
Yeah.
And I also liked how, brought it up before the call, but about how you spoke with Taylor Marshall about the different certain little things that we say. And yeah, sometimes we joke about it, but we got to be careful with the words we use, right? Me with the sports psychology guy, the words we use are very important. And we say a lot of things in jest. Man cave. What was the other one? I have to ask the boss. And why it's important not to say those things. Well, there's one more that I'm missing.
Check with the boss, man cave, and I can't remember.
It'll come to us.
It'll come to us.
What are you?
Well, man cave, I don't know. I just find it kind of weird. Like, I have a bat cave. No, I'm kidding. So I have a basement office that, since we're at home right now with all this lockdown stuff, Ontario is a lot like New York. You're in New York, right? Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm teaching from home, which is fine. But teaching in a house with 4 little children is theoretically possible, but in practicality is practically impossible. So I was struggling I'm like, should I go sit in the car on my computer? Like I did. So I ended up moving a bunch of boxes in the basement and an unfinished part. And I've got like a little cave down there where I do my work, but it's not my man cave. It's a place I go to do things that I have to do for the family, but I don't go there to recreate away from the family. And that's the problem with the man cave analogy, is that for one, it relegates the husband to the level of sort of an animal. I mean, a cave is for bears and beasts. We shouldn't be promoting, and once again, you're right with the words meaning something. Like we might say, oh, man cave, it's funny. It's like he's got his NHL posters and like his old boxing gloves or something. It's like, okay, but you're saying that a man is like an animal that needs a cave to go be alone because when he wants to have fun, he can't be around polite society or something. Or he needs to be hidden. And that will facilitate a lot of vice. So if you are, let's say if you're a wife and you're worried about your husband, with pornography, if he has a man cave, I mean, you got to give your head a shake. It's a place he's going to go in the basement alone, where you don't bother dad when he's down there. That's just a recipe for disaster. That's like somebody who's an alcoholic, and it's like, he's got his secret room where I don't know what he does. It's like, he's obviously drinking. Come on. So you got to be careful of that. Plus, if your children look at you, they'll look at you and go, when I grow up, especially this young man, when I grow up, when I want to do things that grown men do, I go be alone. to do things that I wouldn't do around my kids. It's the same problem that we have with like adult television. So when you grow up secular, it's like, oh, the parents are watching The Sopranos. You can't watch that because you're only 12. Why can't I watch it? Well, there's scenes in strip clubs, and there's violence, and there's swearing and drug use and whatever. It's like, oh, so when I'm grown up, it's a good thing for me to watch that. What does that do? That's appropriate behavior for adults. I can entertain myself with those things when I'm an adult, right? So that's one of the problems with the man cave. It doesn't mean it's wrong to have a space. You know, when I was talking to Taylor Marshall, he was like, have a library. But libraries are for wherever everybody's welcome. Have a smoking room I don't know if you have a cigar habit or something. But once again, it's a place where there's a certain activity taking place, but it's not reserved for a certain person. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And those words are important. I mean, you think even sometimes, and it doesn't work for women also, men to women, as if, you know, St. Joseph would never refer to Mary as the old ball and chain, even though they might say it people will say it as a joke. Well, no, because this is the dignity of your wife, the queen of the castle, right? The blessed mother's the queen, but you know, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't do that. And then the other one we were talking about was what?
We said the man cave, ask the boss. That was one that I've heard my parents, grandparents, and some of my dad, my grandpas, my uncles, and I'm like, yeah, they never sat well with me, but I didn't know why. And then once you guys spoke about it, I said, yeah, you know, that's not really, you're creating a false illusion. It's not haha, because people are acting on that, and decisions are being made with that information.
Right. And just think that think about what a boss is. I wouldn't even, for example, I would never even advocate, even with the traditional headship of the husband, for a wife to say something like ask the boss, because boss and employee is servile.
Yeah, good point.
Right? It's very different. If you're in the military and you were an infantryman or something, and you said, I need to consult my captain, there's dignity in that, because I need to talk to my coach, right? Don't start calling your husband a coach, your wife a coach. You know what I'm saying? It's an analogy, right?
Yeah.
So boss is a weird one, though, because it's, you know, he or she tells me what to do. And I do it because I'm expected to. And then when I do a good enough job, I get to go home. Like, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me. So, of course, it just, also, in our culture, because we live in a very Marxist society, you know, we think that we're not socialists or whatever in North America. Communism is not about money, ultimately. Money is a vehicle to implement socialism, but it's about social control and class struggle, right? This is why you could be a Marxist and use race. You could be a Marxist and use religion. You could be a Marxist and use the economy, any combination thereof. So if we bring in that proletariat versus bourgeoisie motif into our homes, so like my wife or my husband's the boss and I'm the underling, what does that mean? It also gets rid of the responsibility, because, well, my wife's in charge. I can't be accountable for my actions. She told me to go buy the thing. It's not my fault the thing was broken. It was the store's fault. You just end up becoming very infantile, and that stunts your growth as a man. And then finally, it doesn't even correspond with what we're supposed to think about equality. I mean, that would be an improvement from boss. Like, I'm going to go check with my equal. That sounds really lame, but that would even be better, technically speaking, than let me go check with my superior.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let's bring St. Joseph into it. One of the things I always say is, when you have the heart of Jesus, you always have the hearts of Mary and Joseph. The three hearts, it's not just me saying that, it's taken from the Catholic tradition, obviously, but the three hearts are inextricably linked. Talk about St. Joseph, and I love how you titled it Terror of Demons, my favorite title for him. Right. I think that appeals especially to men.
Yeah, well, so it's funny, I didn't actually write the book in the beginning with St. Joseph in mind, per se. It didn't have a title. I toyed with a couple working titles. One was called like More Than Just a Man or something. They were kind of cheesy in my opinion, but I didn't know what to call it. I really just one day said, I had been mulling over when I first converted, so because I've always been sort of a writer. So when I first had my big reversion, I wanted to write, but I was listening to an audio lecture series on Thomas Aquinas and how he didn't even finish the Summa because he said it was all straw. And I'm like, oh, he thought it was worth throwing manure on and burning. Well, the Summa is 1,000,000,000 times better than anything I could ever think of writing. And like, who am I to start a blog? Like, who am I, this little... And obviously that's not the case. We don't all have to be deprecating. But I realized that I needed to wait a while before I put my name out there and wrote anything, because it'd be vain for me to do so, right? So I wanted to make sure I knew the faith better. And eventually I got to the point where I said, I'm going to give it a shot. So I started consulting various places like the Fatima Center and Tim, Meaning a Catholic, and Crusade Channel, various places to write for. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book. So I sat down. It was just something I had on my mind. I don't know why. And I just thought, I'm going to write this book. Then, just as I'd finished, about a month later, I actually went on a weekend retreat. And in this place, there was a really beautiful image of St. Joseph, the Holy Family. And I talked about this with Marshall. The most ancient tradition and the most reasonable tradition is that St. Joseph was a young man, and he was very strong, and he was the chaste guardian of the Virgin. You don't pick a 75-year-old man. I understand the pious tradition, but you don't pick a 75 or 80-year-old man to carry to guide the donkey through the valley of the Jordan River, which is like a tumultuous climate, and it's filled with robbers on the way to Jericho. You don't pick an old man to guide the most beautiful woman in history to go have birth on foot. I mean, that's silly, right? So it was a really great image of St. Joseph. He was like 28 years old. He had a nice beard. He had like great stature, and he was looking down, and like he was tall. It was a beautiful image. So I was just praying on this retreat, and I thought, oh, I'm going to call the book Terror of Demons. Because I realized that just like in the life of Christ, there is so little mention of St. Joseph. But St. Joseph's mannerisms and the way that he raised our Lord in the human sense is present in every action of Christ. So I started thinking about that. This man I was thinking of was really just was modeled after St. Joseph, who really is a terror of demons. And what's so terrifying to the demons? He's holy. He's virtuous. The authority structure is in place. He has control. My wife just got the baby. He has control of his passions. He has temperance. He's just. The Bible calls him a just man. All these titles are in there, and ultimately, the devil hates that. So I thought that's the way we should call the book. And then in there, the various chapters, they just break down how to gain those attributes, essentially.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. Now, have you heard of the different, I'm sure, Our Lady of America, and then also the Ida Perenga alleged apparitions? Now, I don't know where the church stands on all those. I thought I just heard something negative about Our Lady of America, and that Ida Perenga Brazil with Edson Glauber, the Three Hearts devotion. There's like a Hail Joseph prayer. There's a whole bunch of there's an image, just like kind of like the Divine Mercy image. I have it here somewhere. Oh, here it is. I don't know if you've seen any of this stuff or what you'd make of it. I don't know if you could see that, but that's supposed to be the Three Hearts of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I just don't know where the church stands with all those apparitions right now. I don't know if you heard anything.
I don't know either. But when you start looking, well, the Three Hearts, I've heard about that. I go to a traditional parish, and I believe that I've heard people talk about that. But when you do, well, and also St. Joseph was, he was there at the Miracle of the Sun.
Right.
Fatima. So that's an apparition of St. Joseph. And he was holding the infant Christ, or the child Christ, and he blessed the world, which, how interesting is that? Because we forget about that. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that the Father actually is not priest in a sacramental sense, but priest in a functional sense. He's the priest of the home because he is the one who demonstrates sacrifice for his congregation, which is his family, right? So, in any case, Joseph is holding Christ, but it's Joseph who still, in a sense, has paternal authority over our Lord. It's very interesting, right? So there is apparitions of St. Joseph. And also, when you start looking into St. Joseph, you realize that there are so many ancient pious devotions to St. Joseph that have been lost. Like, I didn't know there was a memorare to St. Joseph.
Right.
I didn't know there was a daily consecration to Saint Joseph. I didn't know. I mean, I knew the name, but I didn't know that there was like the litany or the novenas for finding a job. You know, I mean, you hear about these kind of superstitious ones about like burying a Saint Joseph statue to sell your house and things like that, which are probably kind of sketchy. Um, okay, but you don't hear about the actual pious devotions to Saint Joseph that have been around for all time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like Our Lady of America. I know one of the interesting things there. Saint Joseph was called the co-redemptor. Now I know we're all co-redeemers with Christ because he draws us into his redemption. But the fact that since he had that authority on earth, protected Christ, provided for Christ, he participated in the redemption uniquely among men. Interesting.
It is, and I do believe. Sorry if you hear my kids. They
No, I don't sweat it. It's a kid-friendly house.
Yeah. I think if you, I believe there is a acceptable theological position that's relatively traditional that Joseph himself, well, I know that there's a position that he had the regeneration in his mother's womb, right? Which is not an immaculate conception, but it does lend itself to him having a completely sinless life as far as mortal sins go. So he was conceived with original sin, but regenerated. Okay. So there's total precedence for, let's say, the Mary-like attributes, and that seems to be present. And you know what? Just from using our common sense, those things just make sense. I mean, Christ basically chose his own mother in a sense, right? So he probably chose a good one, you know.
Right.
And then, in a sense, he would have chosen his own foster father. And once again, he would have understood the tasks necessary. And just like we were born into the faith, our parents bestow on us the sacraments so we have the graces necessary to go to heaven. It only makes sense that our Lord would do that to his earthly father.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's always mind-boggling to me to think that Saint Joseph had authority, real earthly authority over Christ and the Blessed Mother, who were both by an order of infinity greater than him, yet he was the authority. It's mind-blowing.
And
It's
and that's another thing too, is he demonstrates to us the headship. It's when the angel says it's time to go, right? And the responsibility is on him. And he's also in the background a lot because he's just too busy making sure everything that's done that needs to be done.
That's right. That's self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I wanted to ask with you about, and I figured both of us being sports guys, me with the sports psychology and his wrestling and everything, and you with your background. So how do you use sports, and I know you hit on this a little bit, as a vehicle to build virtue and to just build better men, even if we're not necessarily explicitly talking about the faith, or if you are or not? And how do you do that? So I'm always very interested.
Well, you know what? It's not much different than what we know from the classical Greek philosophy about having to have self-control over your passions in order to live like Aristotle would say, the blessed life, the happy life is a life of virtue. Right. So in order to do that, you have to not be a slave. So yes, sports can become an idol, okay? But as long as you're based and you have a rightly ordered perspective about how important they are, giving your life to the pursuit of excellence in sports, there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not above church, right? So in our day, most men have pretty easy jobs. We don't, I mean, even if you're in construction, this is no disrespect, but I mean, even if you're in construction, you can spend the whole day in a truck. You know, you could spend the whole day, like I see, I mean, put it this way, you can drive by a construction site and a lot of the guys are severely overweight. Not all, but it's obviously not an extremely physical. There are still parts that are physically taxing, but my point is, even in the jobs we consider to be physically demanding, a lot of that has changed because of the mechanization of jobs. You could be a farmer, and yeah, you got a good work ethic, but you're in a tractor for 12 hours a day, and you're just, you know, eating chips and drinking coffee. It's not, you know. So we have to find a way to implement in our life physically demanding things where there are actual stakes. Because that's another thing too, is our motivations for why we want to physically compete will make a big difference in how hard we work. Historically, once again, even just being a human being who needed to prepare for the winter, it's like, I do have to farm and I do have to swing this axe when I'm exhausted because I need to feed my family this winter. Well, that's gone. I'll just go to the grocery store and get, frozen burgers or something, right? So sports are the best way that I think we have now to facilitate a healthy sense of competition and goals that have to be accomplished. And without doing that, there are actual psychological consequences to not doing so. So I think sports are invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great. And as long as, like you said, we're not making it an idol and you have things in proper order, it is a great thing. It could absolutely be a breeding place for virtue. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other point I wanted to bounce off you. So I didn't know if you were going to have your long pipe or not with you today. And I remember hearing you say about that you didn't start smoking that until you saw Father Ripperger.
Partly. Yeah.
Right. Well, here was an interesting thing. I watched one of his videos, Father Ripperger, and he actually had the title was something about the health benefits of smoking.
Yeah.
And then when I looked at it and I said, no, could this be? And he said, well, Google this. And I never smoked or anything, but I looked it up and it was saying there were some health benefits. Of course, cost benefit ratio. We're not advocating for smoking, that whole thing, but for some people, it could be better than for others, and always with temperance and moderation, all this. And then I saw that the WHO had a very big anti-smoking campaign. And now when I hear WHO, I start to think, well, maybe it's the opposite of what they're saying.
Yeah.
Nowadays. So then one of my buddies and I, we started talking about this and how there's a lot of new sins. Not wearing a bike helmet, littering. Now, you want your kids wearing a helmet. You don't want to litter.
I know what you mean, though. Yeah.
Smoking, all that stuff. And now it's okay to have the abortion clinic and gay marriage and all these things. We've created new sins. And just seeing that with smoking, that just opened a lot of, I don't know. I was just curious about it. I wanted to get your take on that.
No, you're exactly right. And you know what it is? It's ultimately all of it is idolatry of the body. And, we don't have to get too political right now about the whole virus thing, but what we're seeing right now ultimately is idolatry of the body. And Christ warns us of this. He doesn't say, go get sick on purpose, but he does instruct us to go to lepers. And he says, fear not him who can kill the body, but fear him who can kill the soul. Ultimately, physical well-being is secondary to spiritual well-being. Now, we don't go seek out unnecessary risk. Right. But we all know that there are risks that we're okay with. I just saw a video on Instagram or Twitter of a guy working on an oil rig. It's kind of going around. It's kind of viral right now. The dude is like my hero. I mean, he's like, it's in Texas. And the stuff he's doing, he's like wrapping chain. And it's like, I would be so injured by doing that because I don't have the skills. And I'm thinking that's his daily job. Well, he probably does it for $150,000 a year because there's danger pay and risk pay. We make those decisions, right? And as Catholics, Christians in general, we know that there are certain risks that we take. Now, as far as things like smoking goes, it was actually St. Pius X. He only smoked one cigarette a week, which actually it probably was so hard to do, and because he probably really enjoyed it, and he'd have one a week, but he had the temperance to only do that, which is actually quite virtuous. But I believe it was him, and he instructed that pastors are never supposed to require that people confess smoking, because the point is, smoking is not a sin. Addiction is a sin. Right? Smoking is not a sin. Intemperance is a sin. Right? Buying cigarettes is not a sin. Spending money you should be using to buy your children milk, and instead buying cigarettes, that's a sin, because it's either virtue or it's vicious. It's a vice. And as far as the actual benefits or so of tobacco, I think when I look at that, you're from an Italian family as well. My nonno, God rest his soul, when I was 7 years old, he put a little bit of wine in my water at lunchtime, and he drank responsibly his whole life. And there was a sense of recreation and leisure in the Mediterranean culture, because of the fact that it's like, hey, we don't give up alcohol and then binge on it, and we don't drink too much of it and then stop. We just always enjoy it properly. So it does seem to me that the mass-produced cigarettes, there seems to be some monkey business with what's in them. I think that's the main issue. But as far as smoking pipes or cigars and things, it makes you relax. Think about, for example, how stressful and hectic our lives are. if you had something where a couple times a week you were going to sit there on your front porch with your neighbor, with your wife, with whoever, go for a walk with a buddy, and you'd light up a pipe and you just kind of drag on it for a while and chat. Physically, physically you do relax from tobacco. That's true. It's an actual effect of it. But secondly, you're just going to stop looking at your phone. You're going to listen better because you actually have something in your mouth. Actually, I know a man who used to negotiate telecommunication contracts in Africa. He's a Canadian guy. And he got in the habit of smoking a pipe while he was there because it made him keep his mouth shut. So he could listen and then do the right offers. So I think people
do that too.
Yeah, I should do that a lot of the time, man. So as far as the health benefits, I think it's more just a psychological and you're just relaxing, and stress is a killer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just amazing how a lot of the real sins get swept to the side. Fornication, fine. Contraception, fine. Abortion, all these things. But then on the other hand, okay, heaven forbid you spank the kid. I'm not advocating for, constant spanking. There's usually better ways you could do it. But if the kid needs to be spanked every now and then, it happens. And it's not a mortal sin here. It's not a venial sin to discipline your child. That's important. That's your job. But it seems we've created a whole new list of like white sins or whatever.
It's like the carbon thing. Hey, man, I ride my bike to work. Because I love exercise. I like gardening. I mean, nature is a wonderful thing. Tolkien, when he wrote Lord of the Rings, he was a huge nature guy. But it's the creation. It's not the creator. We can't sin against the ocean because the ocean doesn't have a soul. We can sin through, once again, it's like the cigarettes. It's not a sin to smoke. It's a sin to be addicted to smoking, or it's a sin to be whatever. It's unhealthily attached. That's a matter of virtue. You could be sinful in your treatment of the ocean because it's like, I know this is going to ruin somebody's fishing, which they need for their livelihood, but I'm going to dump my toxic sludge anyway. But that's against the person and them being able to provide for their family. It's not against the microbes or whatever, in the ocean. So we have to look at things with the spiritual and the moral first and the physical part second, and we've just lost that.
Right. And I was thinking similarly with alcohol, if I recall correctly from what Father Ripperger said, it's that if it's affecting your use of reason, now you're starting to talk about sin because God gave us an intellect. We have our reason. So if it affects our reason mildly, it would be a venial sin. If it affects it greatly, it would be a mortal sin. But it would not be, we're not Puritans here. You can have that.
Yeah. And St. Augustine, he didn't like drinking, eh? He just didn't like the taste of it. But when he was bishop of Tagaste, I believe it was Tagaste. Was it? I think so. No, Hippo. I can't remember.
Sounds right.
Anyway, he's St. Augustine of Hippo, but I can't remember if he was born in Tagaste or was the bishop of there, but North Africa somewhere. And he would publicly drink once a year, though. He made it a thing where he would publicly enjoy wine, whether it was, I don't know, some sort of feast or something with the statesmen and whatever. And he would do so that people didn't think he was instructing them not to drink, because he didn't want them to confuse his preferences with like being a teetotaler, which is not necessary. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, all very interesting stuff. Thank you, Kendi. I really appreciate everything. Where can people find more information from you? Any websites, social media? How do we send them your way?
Kennedy Hall on Twitter, just my name, all lowercase. I got the address in like 2008 or 2009. I never used Twitter for years, but I never gave it up, which I was glad. A year ago when I started going on Twitter, I had my own name, which makes it easier. Kennedy Hall on Twitter. And my book, Terror of Demons, is available on Amazon. Pretty simple to find. If you actually go to my Twitter profile, it's a pinned tweet, with a link to it. You can buy the book there. I do a lot of stuff with Tim Flanders at Meaning of Catholic. And in fact, in the book, you're directed towards Meaning of Catholic for various supplemental resources. So we have a chapter, for example, on like taming the horse. That's the one chapter on physical mortification, etc. Well, a lot of people know how to work out, but if they don't, they can actually go to the Meaning of Catholic website, and then there's an actual adjustable workout plan there. And there's resources for every single chapter. So, and also I write for the Fatima Center, fatima.org. Series on the Bible. It's a basic Bible catechesis. I did a series on St. Joseph, and I just finished a series on the Kingship of Christ. And those are my main outlets.
Excellent. We're going to make sure we send everyone your way. Again, thank you very much, Kendi, for all that you do and for joining our show. God bless you and your family.
No problem.
Take care.